The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech. Today is the fourth day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 22nd of Adar, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Wednesday, March 11th, 2026. We will read Parashat Vayakhel Pekudei this coming Shabbat, and we are 21 days from Pesach. Let's begin. We start with Me'am Loez in the Parsha. We're still on Parashat Vayakhel, and we spoke last episode specifically about that it is a little bit strange that there are two verses in the beginning of this Parsha that speak about Shabbat in a Parsha that mostly speaks about the building of the tabernacle. And we spoke yesterday and the day before that about this idea that you might think that it's so important to build the tabernacle that you should work through Shabbat. And so this is to tell you, don't do that, right? That actually you should take that time off on Shabbat. And this, we said yesterday, is the way in which the 39 different categories of labor actually are derived from the things that you actually are commanded to do during the 6 days a week to build the Mishkan and build the tabernacle in the wilderness. There's a beautiful midrash that is actually brought on this of actually a personified Torah that actually complains to Hashem. So according to the midrash, the Torah actually says to God, Lord of the universe, now the Israelites are in the desert and do not have any other concerns. They can therefore sit and study Torah. But what will happen after they enter the Holy Land? Each one will be involved in his own concerns, one with his field and one with his vineyard, and they will not have even a moment to learn. So the Torah is saying to God, and it's wonderful how the rabbis sort of personify Torah as this personality that wants to be learned, that wants to be involved and wants people to learn it and open it. Complains to God, says, okay, the Jewish people are sitting in the wilderness, you're giving them manna, they don't have to work, right? All they do is follow this fire. And so they have a lot of time to study the Torah in the wilderness. But once they have gainful employment and they're in the land and they're going about their life, I think we can relate to this, it's very hard to find time to learn Torah. And in some ways, of course, that's the reason this podcast was created for the first place, to enable people every day to access Torah. But there's actually a way in which the midrash responds to this. God actually says back to the Torah, I have given them a full day in the week dedicated to you. On the Sabbath day, they will study Torah. On that day, they have no other concerns. So his response, God's response to the Torah is specifically, well, there's one day a week where they don't have to go to work and they don't have to be concerned with their own affairs. And this is a day that's dedicated to God, as our Parsha actually says in the verse, Shabbat Shabbaton LaHashem, that it's a Sabbath unto the Lord, right? It's a stopping for the Lord, right? So it's not just, I think there's an idea that like Shabbat is really just for us to rest, right? It's just for us to have a day off and do whatever you want to do. And this part of Shabbat is true. There is that part of Shabbat that we should enjoy it and we should have oneg and we should have pleasure and we should rest. But there's also another aspect, a very important, essential aspect to Shabbat, that it's also a day for godly concerns. It's a day to raise our eyes and actually concentrate and focus on things that are eternal, like, of course, the study of Torah. And there's a great machloket, there's a great argument within the Gemara, within the Talmud, of what is Shabbat supposed to be? Is it a day that's really just for our rest and for our relaxation? Is it for, and in the terms of the Gemara, is it for us? Or is it for God, which in the terms of the Gemara means is it a day for studying Torah and holy concerns? And in the way that usually it comes down is it should be for both. And so we should make sure that every Shabbat we have some time dedicated to our own pleasure and our own fun and our own relaxation and rest. But there should always be some part of our day that we dedicate ourselves to studying Torah. So it's a wonderful tradition to have classes in the synagogue at this time and spend some more time learning. And this is also a great thing for you, to make a special time on Shabbat to study a little bit of Torah, to add Torah to your Shabbat table or whatever it is, just a little bit of Torah to dedicate this day, not just to your own relaxation, but Shabbat Shabbaton l'Hashem, specifically to God in this way. And it's also an idea of saying, my pleasure alone doesn't just come from eating sweets or eating good food or sleeping a lot, but actually my pleasure also comes from learning Torah, from being with you, through being connected to holy things. And that is a good way of sort of training our mind of what is our mind? What does our heart lust after, of desire? Of course, it's always going to desire after pleasures and the things that are ephemeral in this world. But we also have to train our hearts and our minds on Shabbat through doing this to actually seek out the pleasure and the joy of spiritual things, which are actually truly eternal, like the studying of Torah and the doing of good deeds. Let's now turn to the Mishnah Torah. We're going to learn the 17th and 18th halachot of the second chapter of Maimonides of Rambam on Hilchot Chametz uMatzah, the laws of Passover. Today we're going to speak specifically about the situation of someone who rents out a house from a Jewish landowner on the 14th of Nisan, right? The day right before Pesach, the day when the Korban Pesach would happen, the sacrifice of the Paschal Lamb would happen when the temple existed in the afternoon at least. Let's say they rent out the house in the morning. Can we then presume that whose responsibility is it for the house to be checked? Do you have to rush right when you get there to check the house on that day, or can you presume that the Jewish landowner did it for you? And the answer is, according to Maimonides, that yes, we can presume that the house has been checked if it is a Jewish landowner or Jewish owner of the property, that they inspected the house before Pesach, and we could just assume that. Very, very important. Unless we have, of course, information otherwise that they didn't check it, we can presume and make a presumption that they did check it. Now, this is only, of course, in the case when it's a Jewish landowner. Like if it's a non-Jewish owner of the hotel or the house or whatever you're renting, then you should pretty much presume that it has not been checked unless you've heard something specifically otherwise. If it's a Pesach hotel or something and they have it all prepared or whatever. Then you should make the presumption that it has not been checked because it's not a Jew who's there. And obviously the non-Jew does not have a responsibility according to the Torah at that point. Now, the Mishnah Torah also discusses the case of fine for renting, right? And renting. But what happens when the key is not yet handed over? Right? Because we believe and we understand that when the key is handed over to the tenant from the landlord, that's really when the rental begins, because the tenant then has access to the building. So you can't expect the tenant to do something and check the room before they actually receive the key. So the case is specifically brought, what happens right when you get the key before the 14th of Nisan actually happens, right? The key for entering the building, is it still, let's say you get it on the 13th. Right? Is it still the landlord's responsibility to know that you're staying during Passover, and therefore they should check the place? And the answer is no. It's not a presumption anymore, because if you even have it for a moment before the 14th of Nisan, even for a moment, you should then have the presumption that it's upon you, it's your responsibility then to check for chametz in that place. But of course, the opposite, if the key is given after the 14th of Nisan begins, then we can presume once again that if it's a Jewish landowner, that they are the ones who check the house for chametz. And obviously, this is practical. It really does become practical when a lot of people go on vacation for Pesach and make all kinds of assumptions on maybe you don't need to clean the house for Pesach if you're at somebody else's house. And if it's not really your property or you just rented it, if it's not your property, does it really mean, do you really not have to have chametz there? And of course, the question is, yes, you should get rid of the chametz if you are staying there. And if you're renting it out. Let's now turn to Menorat HaMaor. We've discussed in the past couple of episodes this scene where Avraham experiences a prophecy from God called the brit, bein, habetarim, or the covenant between the parts. And in this dark prophecy that Avraham is shown in the 15th chapter of Genesis, the book of Genesis, he sees many terrible and dark things that are going to happen to the Jewish people in the future. And this is really one of the first times in which God tells Abraham, just because you're going to be my people and you're going to multiply and you're going to get the land of Israel and all these things, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be good, right? Things are actually going to get worse and be bad sometimes. And there's this wonderful teaching on this, and my heart was sort of opened by this teaching in such a beautiful way. There's a particular midrash in Bereshit Rabbah that the Menorat HaMaor brings here on this passage that we haven't really looked at yet. It goes like this. Shimon bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, 4 things were shown to him. Gehinom, the kingdoms, the giving of the Torah, and the temple. So what does that mean? Well, according to the midrash, God showed Avraham 4 different things. Gehinom, and that's the Jewish word for hell, right? Or whatever bad happens, what we would now call the bad place if you've watched that TV show, right? Hell, or whatever punishment we get in the afterlife. The kingdoms, which are malchuyot in Hebrew, which really doesn't just mean kingdoms, it means the nations of the world that have power over the Jewish people. And then finally, the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, right? The giving of the Torah to the Jewish people. And finally, the Beit HaMikdash, or the temple. And this is the key line he says here. So long as your children are engaged in 2, they will be saved from 2. If they separate themselves from the 2, they will be judged by the 2. So this is very interesting. What we're supposed to be doing, it seems according to the statement, is as Jews, we're supposed to be busy both with the learning of the Torah and then trying to observe it. And of course, the temple service. So I don't think the temple just means the exact temple in Jerusalem. That would be great. But any way in which we worship Hashem and come close to God. So really our 2 tasks in this world are learning Torah and doing mitzvot and coming close to Hashem, right? And serving God. And as long as we are busy with those 2 things, what the midrash tells us is we'll be saved both from the punishment of this world, which seems to be the sort of enslavement and oppression of the kingdoms of the world, and from punishment in the afterlife, which would be called hell or Gehinom or whatever you want to call it there. And the second we stop from one of them, either stop from studying Torah or stop being from worshiping in the temple and worshiping God, whatever it may be, then one of these things will join our lives, either Gehinom, hell, or the subjugation of the kingdoms of the world over the Jewish people. And actually, the midrash is very interesting. It's God supposedly says to Avram, which one do you want? Right? Which one do you prefer? You know, if you're going to be punished, would you rather be punished in this world by the nations of the world, by being oppressed, or would you rather be punished in the world to come, in the world of eternity, for the bad things you've done? And supposedly, according to most authorities, most positions, Abraham picks this world, right? Abraham picks the kingdoms of this world. And it's in some ways simple why, right? We know that the punishment of the world to come will be much worse and be on much more serious things, right? Be much more eternal, last longer, right? The punishments or the sufferings of this world are nothing in compared to that. And so Avram actually says the way that I want my children to be judged in this world and punished for what they do is by subjugation of the non-Jewish kingdoms and powers around them. And so therefore, that's why we say, that's why when we are subjugated by non-Jews, and throughout our history, one of the ways the Jewish communities have looked at this in the past was that we were transgressing. We're not engaging with the Torah, or we're not engaging in service of Hashem, in service of God. And so they read subjugation by non-Jews as sort of an act of punishment or tshuva from God, right? This is a beautiful idea because it helps us interpret our suffering and say, and look at the suffering we're saying and say, this too is from God, and this too should spur me towards tshuva. But I think it's important to note really quickly, especially in our day and age, that this can be a very harmful theology for many. If taken to the extreme, where everything bad that happens to you sort of becomes self-blame. Every oppression or persecution you experience becomes an opportunity to blame yourself. Well, I don't really think the Torah is really saying that. I think this Torah really is telling us here that as long as we're engaged in Torah and the Beit HaMikdash and the temple and serving Hashem, we shouldn't really worry so much about the other things. Very importantly, and interestingly enough, again, what is the sign of us actually doing good in this world is Jewish power, right? Is not being oppressed or not being enslaved by the non-Jewish communities around them. And so, but this also, of course, tells us how we should look at the darkness, and we should understand through all things, whether good things, the bad things in our life, we should always respond to each thing that we have in our life of how can I become better? We can focus all day long on the bad things that other people are doing, but Judaism will tell us over and over and over and over and over again what we should be focusing on is our own actions, right? Because that's the thing we control. We don't really control anything else. Very, very important. And I think this is very empowering in our world to constantly engage in this self-reflection and becoming better, and seeing the bad things that happen to us as ways to inspire us to do tshuva and become better. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.